My name is Rachel Morrison. I'm 48 years old. And 6 months ago, I made a choice that destroyed my ex-in-law's reputation, got them shunned from their church community, and forced them to leave the state entirely. I have no regrets. But before you decide whether I'm a hero or a villain, you need to understand exactly what led to that moment. And trust me, there's a lot you need to know. If this story is already making your blood boil, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Drop a comment below telling me, are you team exposure or team forgiveness? Because I did something calculated, something strategic, something that some people say was cruel, and I want to hear what you think. Let's dive in. Let me set the scene for you properly, because you need to understand the full context before you judge what I did. I'm a 48-year-old divorced mother of 2 daughters. Miranda is 18 years old, a freshman at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, studying psychology. She's thoughtful, introspective, and she carries guilt like it's her responsibility. Sophie is 16 years old, a junior at Asheville High School, and she's the fighter of the two. Where Miranda internalizes, Sophie externalizes. Their father, my ex-husband Derek, died in a car accident 14 months ago. It was a drunk driving accident. He was driving alone. Nobody else was hurt, which somehow makes it worse. He was selfish even in his death. But when Derek died, our family didn't just lose him. We lost our stability. We lost our peace. And we inherited a nightmare that I'm still unpacking in therapy. Derek left behind more than grief, you see. He left behind 2 children that nobody knew about. 2 young boys, ages 7 and 9 at the time of his death, born to a woman named Jennifer. Jennifer was Derek's affair partner of 6 years. 6 years. For 6 years, while I was working, building my marketing agency, believing in my marriage, Derek was maintaining another family, another household, another set of obligations and promises that he was actually keeping better than the ones he made to me. Jennifer died of cancer 8 months after Derek's accident. So these 2 little boys, Lucas and Marcus, became orphans. Nobody wanted them. The extended family wanted nothing to do with them. Some of Derek's cousins said they couldn't afford to take them. Others said they didn't have space. What they meant was they didn't want the responsibility of raising someone else's children. And Derek's parents, Richard and Margaret Chen Morrison, decided they would use those children as leverage against me. Here's what you need to understand about Richard and Margaret. They're wealthy. Old money. The kind of wealth that comes from generational investment and smart business decisions. Richard owns a chain of 8 restaurants across North Carolina and South Carolina. Upscale dining establishments in Charlotte, Raleigh, Greensboro, Wilmington, Asheville, and a few other cities. Margaret sits on the boards of 3 charities. They're respected in their community. They go to the Riverside Faith Community Church, a large, traditional congregation with about 2,000 members. On paper, they're pillars of society. In reality, they're manipulative, controlling, and willing to weaponize grief to get what they want. I met them when I married Derek. I was 22 years old, and they were already in their late 40s. Richard was charming but distant. Margaret was warm on the surface, but cold underneath. I remember thinking at the time that she was keeping tabs on everything: how I dressed, how I spoke, what I spent, how much attention I paid to Derek. It was suffocating, even then, but I was young and in love, and I thought that would be enough to overcome any family dysfunction. It wasn't. Over the years, I watched Margaret try to control everything. She wanted to pick where we lived. She wanted to influence how we decorated our home. She wanted to make decisions about our finances. And when I pushed back, she'd play the victim. She'd tell Derek I was being disrespectful. She'd tell him I didn't appreciate the family. She'd make him choose between his wife and his parents, and he always chose to avoid the conflict rather than actually stand up to her. By the time Derek died, we were already heading toward a final divorce. I'd found emails, discovered the affair, found out about Lucas and Marcus, and I was done. Done with the lying, done with the manipulation, done with pretending that everything was fine when it was fundamentally broken. But then Derek crashed his car into a tree at 2 a.m, and the divorce became a different kind of complicated. When Derek died, Richard and Margaret immediately started pushing for custody of my daughters, not because they loved them, but because they wanted to consolidate power. They wanted control of Derek's estate. They wanted to prove that I, the woman who'd left their son, was a failure. They wanted to rewrite the narrative so that Derek wasn't the villain, and I wasn't the victim. They wanted to be the heroes of their own story. I was going to make sure that didn't happen. I had custody. I had the will. I had documentation of Derek's infidelity because, yes, I had all that evidence from the incomplete divorce at the time of his death. The absolute certainty that my daughters needed protecting. The court battles started immediately. Within 2 weeks of the funeral, Richard and Margaret's lawyer sent me a letter. They wanted custody hearings. They wanted my daughters to live with them. They wanted weekly visitations that would have pulled my kids out of school. They wanted to be named as guardians in case anything happened to me. I said no to every demand. My lawyer said no to every demand. And the court, thankfully, agreed with me. The judge looked at the documentation I provided. Evidence of Richard and Margaret's controlling behavior. Evidence of Derek's infidelity that they'd supported. Evidence that I was a stable, present, involved parent. And sided with me. Full custody stayed with me. The girls could visit their grandparents if they wanted, but there were no forced visitations. There was no shared custody arrangement. Richard and Margaret didn't accept defeat. They just changed tactics. It was a Saturday in April. April 6th, to be specific. A beautiful spring day. The kind of day that makes you forget about all the darkness for just a moment. The kind of day where you think maybe, just maybe, things are going to be okay. Sophie's birthday was the following week. She was turning 16. I'd asked her what she wanted to do, and she said something that surprised me. She didn't want a big party. She didn't want a bunch of people at the house. She didn't want to be the center of attention with all the family drama hanging over us. What she wanted was something low-key and meaningful, and she wanted to do it at the Asheville Community Market. The Asheville Community Market is one of those places that reminds you why you live where you live. It happens every Saturday morning in the parking lot of the old mill building downtown. There are farmers from all over the region selling fresh vegetables, local honey, artisan breads, handmade crafts, homemade goods from small producers. It smells like fresh earth and possibility. It's the kind of place where you can forget that the world is full of people trying to hurt you. I took Sophie there early, around 9 a.m. We wandered through the market together for a little while, bought some flowers from my favorite vendor, an older woman named Clara, who grows these beautiful wildflower bouquets. Then I said, "Okay, birthday girl, here's the deal. I'm giving you a budget of $150. You can spend it however you want. No restrictions. Whatever makes you happy. Go." Sophie was 16 years old. She'd been through a lot. Her father was dead. Her world had been turned upside down. She deserved a few hours of just being a teenager at a farmer's market, buying whatever she wanted, without judgment or limitation. She was thriving in that moment. I watched her move through the vendor stalls with purpose and joy. She bought a block of expensive aged cheddar from a vendor. She bought some fresh strawberries that she said smelled like summer. She bought a small loaf of sourdough bread from a baker. She was composing the perfect breakfast, the perfect snack, the perfect moment. She was happy. I went to pick up some more flowers from Clara, stayed maybe 35 minutes while Sophie wandered. And then my phone rang at 10:13 a.m. It was Sophie, and she was crying. "Mom, there are these women. They're surrounding me. They're yelling. Mom, I don't know what to do. I'm scared. I have never moved faster in my life." I called Miranda. She was nearby in the market with a friend. They'd come to get coffee, and I ran toward the sound of Sophie's voice. And when we found her, standing near the bakery section, I saw 6 women. 6 older women, ranging in age from maybe mid-50s to early 70s, surrounding my daughter in a semicircle, yelling at her, shaming her. And I recognized some of them from Riverside Faith Community Church. "You call yourself a Christian?" one of them was shouting. Her name was Carol, I think. I'd seen her at church events years ago. "A good Christian honors their family. You're rejecting your grandfathers." "Your poor baby brothers," another woman interrupted, her voice dripping with false pity. "They have nobody, and you won't even acknowledge them as family. They're your blood, Sophie. Your responsibility. What kind of daughter of God are you?" A third woman's voice was shrill, almost hysterical. "Your grandfather is suffering. He's lost a son. And you won't spend time with your half-brothers. It's unchristian. It's cruel. It's selfish. Your mother has poisoned you against your family," a fourth woman said. This one I recognized. Her name was Brenda. and she taught at the Christian school. She's kept you from your inheritance, from your family legacy. That's abuse, Sophie. That's emotional abuse. I positioned myself between Sophie and the group. She was shaking. She had tears running down her face. And I could feel the anger rising in me, like a wave I couldn't control. This wasn't just anger. This was rage. Righteous, protective, ferocious rage. Back away from my daughter, I said. My voice was calm, terrifyingly calm, the kind of calm that comes right before someone loses control. One of the women I recognized, her name was definitely Carol. She'd been at some church event years ago, when Derek and I were still together, stepped forward. Rachel, we're trying to help. These girls, they've been raised without proper Christian values. They don't understand their obligations to. I didn't let her finish. I stood up to my full height. I'm 5'10", which is tall for a woman, looked directly at Carol, and I let her have it. I mean, I absolutely ripped her apart. I told her exactly what I thought about people who would corner a 16-year-old girl in a public place and shame her for having boundaries. I told her that my daughter had a therapist and trauma to process, and she wasn't going to get better by being ambushed in a farmer's market by a group of church ladies who thought they knew better than actual mental health professionals. My daughter set boundaries with her grandparents, I said, my voice rising. That's healthy. That's what therapists recommend. You're calling her unchristian for protecting her own mental health. That's not Christianity. That's abuse. The volume was rising. Vendors were staring. Other shoppers were backing away slowly, creating a perimeter around us. Security showed up within minutes. 2 guys in polo shirts with community market security badges. They didn't look aggressive. They just looked tired. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened. "Ma'am, we're going to need everyone to disperse," one of the security guards said to me. Not to the women who'd started the confrontation, to me. Because I was the one raising my voice, making a scene. I grabbed Sophie's hand. Miranda helped us gather her belongings, the cheese, the strawberries, the bread, the flowers, and we left, with those 6 women following us to our car like vultures, still muttering about Christian duty and family obligations, and how I was poisoning my daughters against their family. That night, after both girls were asleep, I sat in my kitchen with a glass of wine I didn't finish and my laptop open. I was shaking, not from fear, from rage, pure unadulterated rage. I didn't know what I was about to discover. I didn't know how deep this went. I just knew that I had been pushed into a corner and I was about to come out swinging. I reached out to someone I knew from Riverside Faith Community Church. His name was Marcus Webb. He was a divorced dad who'd been kind to me at church events before Derek died and I stopped going to services. He'd always treated me with respect. He'd never been part of the judgment or the manipulation. I called him at 11 p.m., probably not the best timing, but I was desperate. And I asked him if he knew why these women had confronted my daughter. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Rachel, I'm going to send you something. I want you to read it, and then I want you to call me back so we can talk about what you want to do." He sent me a link to the Riverside Faith Community Church private Facebook group. I'd been removed from that group months ago, after Derek died, and I withdrew from the church. But Marcus still had access. He sent me screenshots, pages and pages of screenshots. Margaret had posted in that group a long, detailed post that had been going up for 3 days. The post was circulating and gathering sympathy from the more extreme members of the congregation. The post claimed that I was refusing to obey my husband's legacy and keeping my daughters away from their rightful family. She claimed that Richard and she were essentially homeless because of my greed, which was absolutely false. They owned 3 properties. The primary residence in Asheville was a massive Victorian mansion in the Grove Park area. They owned a vacation property in the mountains near Banner Elk. And they owned a condo in Charlotte, where Richard spent time when he had business in the city. They were hardly homeless. She claimed that my daughters were selfish and unchristian for not wanting to help with Lucas and Marcus. She claimed that I'd abandoned my responsibility to Derek's other children. She claimed that I was raising godless feminists who didn't understand family duty. She said things like, "These girls have been poisoned by their mother's bitterness. They won't even look at their baby brothers. They refuse to acknowledge them as family. This is emotional abuse of the highest order." But here's the thing that made my skin crawl. She claimed that Lucas and Marcus were her biological grandchildren through a surrogacy arrangement. She said I had been unable to have more children, and had agreed to use a surrogate, but then refused the children because they were boys. She said the other woman, Jennifer, had been the surrogate. She was making up an entire narrative to hide Derek's infidelity, the surrogacy story. That's what got me. That's what made my hands shake as I read it. She wrote, Rachel couldn't have children. It was a source of shame in her life. So when Derek approached her about using a surrogate, she agreed. Jennifer was the surrogate. A wonderful woman who carried the children out of the goodness of her heart. And when the babies were born, 2 beautiful boys, Rachel took one look at them and said no. She said she only wanted daughters. She said, boys, you'd be too much trouble. She refused to sign the adoption papers. She refused to bring the children home. And the church was believing her. Marcus sent me screenshots of the comments, hundreds of them. People expressing sympathy, offering prayers, condemning me, calling me selfish, calling me unchristian, calling me a bad mother. Saying things like, no wonder Derek was struggling, no wonder he sought comfort elsewhere. And this woman is heartless, refusing babies because of their gender, that's evil. And I'm praying for the grandsons. They need Jesus and they need family. And Richard was there in the comments, playing the grieving widower, even though Derek was his son, not his wife. Talking about how sad he was that his granddaughters had turned away from family. Saying things like, we're doing our best to help Lucas and Marcus, but Rachel won't let us. She's keeping them from their rightful inheritance. She's keeping them from their family. And my granddaughters are willing participants in this cruelty. I read every single comment, every single one, and I realized something. This church valued one thing above almost everything else: moral purity. Specifically, they were obsessed with infidelity. It was a cardinal sin in their theology. Husbands or wives, it didn't matter. One indiscretion and you were done. You were a pariah. You were cast out. And Margaret had completely hidden Derek's infidelity behind this surrogacy lie. She'd rewritten the narrative so that Derek wasn't the villain. Derek wasn't the man who cheated, lied, maintained a secret family for 6 years, and then died recklessly while intoxicated. Derek was the victim. Poor Derek, struggling with an unfeeling wife who wouldn't give him more children. Poor Derek, forced to seek comfort with another woman. And I was the villain. Cold, selfish, cruel, unfeeling. I sat there at 2 a.m, with my hands shaking and my heart pounding, and I made a decision. A decision I knew would change everything. A decision I knew would blow this situation wide open. I decided that Margaret's lie needed to be exposed, not gently, not diplomatically, but publicly, in front of the entire community that had been listening to her narrative. In front of the church that valued moral purity above all else. I decided that they needed to know the truth. Derek had been unfaithful. Derek had maintained a secret family. Derek had lied to all of them. And Margaret had known about it, supported it, and then covered it up. Here's what I had. Because I'd been mid-divorce when Derek died, I had kept everything. Everything. Photographs of Derek with Jennifer in our living room. Not innocent photos, intimate photos, him kissing her, his hands on her face, her hands on his body, their foreheads touching. The kind of photos that speak to a deep, ongoing intimacy. Their faces were absolutely clear, no ambiguity, no room for misinterpretation. Jennifer looked nothing like me. She was South Asian, with beautiful dark skin and long black hair, and a completely different build than me. Her style was different. Her presence was different. There was no way anyone could believe the surrogacy story if they saw these photos. I had text messages between Derek and Jennifer, explicit messages. Messages where they talked about their children, Derek writing things like, Lucas said his first word today. I missed it because I was with you. I'm sorry. I know I should be there. Jennifer responding, you're building a life with me too. Both lives matter. Messages about their plans for the future. Messages where Derek promised to leave me. He'd written to her in September, I'm filing for divorce. It's going to be messy, but I'm done. I want to be with you. I want to be present for our sons. I had emails between Derek and his parents, Richard and Margaret, where they discussed his affair, where they expressed support for it. Not judgment. Support. Richard had written to him, Margaret and I understand. You're a man with needs. Jennifer seems like a nice woman. We'll help you manage this situation discreetly so the family doesn't suffer public embarrassment. Margaret wrote, we'll back you up no matter what. The affair can be managed if we're strategic. Your father and I will help you present a united front. There were literally emails saying things like, "We're proud of how you've handled this, and Jennifer seems to be a stabilizing influence. We think you're happier with her. And when this comes out, and it will come out, we'll protect you." And then there were the worst parts. Messages from Richard and Margaret to my daughters. Messages sent in the weeks after Derek's death. Messages where they called my daughters bastards, their own granddaughters, because they'd found out about the affair. Messages where they said, "This is your fault. If you hadn't told your mother about your father's affair, she wouldn't have started the divorce. Your father would still be alive. You killed him with your disloyalty." One message was dated 2 days after Derek's funeral. 2 days. I sat with that evidence for 3 days. I didn't sleep much. I went to work. I run a marketing agency called Morrison Creative, and thankfully, my team could operate without me being present for a few days. And I moved through the motions. I was on autopilot, but my mind was somewhere else. My mind was planning. On the third day, Thursday, I decided. I drove to a print shop in downtown Asheville called The Paper House. It's a high-end printing company that specializes in luxury materials. I walked in with a folder full of evidence and I said, "I need to print something, and I need it to look beautiful." The woman behind the counter, her name was Sophia. She was maybe in her 50s with reading glasses on a beaded chain, didn't ask questions. She just said, "Tell me what you need." I told her I needed high-quality printing. Paid extra for it. Paid extra for thick cardstock. I paid extra to have everything bound professionally in leather-bound binders, the kind you'd get for an important document or a precious record. Black leather with gold lettering on the spine. They looked expensive and intentional and completely professional. And then I went home and spent 8 hours, literally 8 hours from Thursday evening to early Friday morning, personalizing the binders. I created 45 of them. Each one was identical in structure, but unique in presentation. I organized the evidence chronologically. Each binder opened with those photographs of Derek and Jennifer, their faces clear, their bodies close, intimate, undeniable. Underneath, I'd written in elegant calligraphy, "Derek's story, the affair that wasn't a surrogacy." Then came the text messages, printed on beautiful paper, organized chronologically so you could watch the relationship unfold. See Derek promise to leave me. See Derek express his love for Jennifer. See Derek talking about his sons. Then came the emails from Richard and Margaret discussing how to manage the situation, how to handle the affair discreetly. Then came the messages to my daughters, the cruelty, the blame, the accusations. Each one printed and highlighted so the words stood out. "This is your fault. You killed him. Bastards." I didn't include any commentary. I didn't editorialize. I didn't write essays about what the evidence meant. I just presented the facts, the timeline, the evidence, the truth. Let the evidence speak for itself. And then I waited. I waited all day Friday. I waited all day Saturday. And I planned exactly what I was going to do. Riverside Faith Community Church meets at 9 a.m. on Sunday mornings for the early service. It's a large building, modern architecture, probably built in the 1990s, with a huge glass entryway and a sprawling lobby area. They get about 1,200 people for the early service. It's a full house almost every week. There's a lobby area where they have tables set up with pamphlets about various church programs, sign-up sheets for volunteer opportunities, community announcements about local nonprofits they support. And there's a small table in the back corner of that lobby, near the restrooms, where they keep the hymnal books and the printed programs for the service. I wasn't a member anymore. I'd stopped attending after Derek died. I didn't feel welcome. I didn't feel safe. But I knew the layout. I knew their processes. I knew that Sunday morning was chaos. Hundreds of people arriving, signing in, grabbing programs, finding seats. Nobody checks those tables closely. Nobody verifies what's there. People just grab what they need and move on. I arrived at 8:35 a.m. on Sunday, April 10th. I wasn't dressed fancy. I wore jeans and a simple blouse. I looked like someone who belonged there. I parked 3 blocks away. I didn't want my car visible in the parking lot, and I walked over. I went through the side entrance, the one that doesn't have as much traffic. I was carrying a large canvas tote bag. Nobody looked at me twice. I moved through the lobby like I belonged there. I went to the back table, the one with the hymnals and the programs. I took a moment to make sure nobody was watching. Then I pulled 45 binders from my tote bag and arranged them prominently on that table, right next to the hymnals, right where people would grab them when they grabbed their programs. I arranged them so the black leather covers caught the light, so they looked professional and intentional, so they looked like something important. And then I left. Just like that. I turned and walked out the side entrance, and nobody stopped me. Nobody questioned me. I was just another woman who'd been to church. I went home. I made coffee. I sat with Miranda and Sophie and explained what I'd done. I told them exactly what was in those binders. I told them why I'd done it. I didn't ask for their permission. I didn't ask for their approval. I just told them what was happening, and I asked them to be prepared for the fallout. Miranda's reaction was complicated. She understood the impulse. She understood the anger. She understood the need to protect herself and her sister. But she worried about the fallout. She worried about how this would look. She worried about being that girl whose grandfather left a church because of what her mother did. She worried about the optics of having her family drama broadcast to 1,200 people. Sophie's reaction was different. Sophie said, "Good." Just one word. Good. And then she walked out of the room. I didn't try to convince her I was right. I knew I wasn't entirely right, but I was protecting them. And sometimes, those aren't the same thing. By 10:15 a.m., my phone started blowing up. Text messages, emails, calls from people at church. The gossip mill at Riverside Faith Community Church is faster than the internet. It's instantaneous. It's supernatural in how quickly information spreads through that community. The Facebook group erupted, and I mean absolutely erupted. The conversation shifted in real time. People who had been offering sympathy to Richard and Margaret were now posting things like, "This is disgusting," and "How could they lie like this?" and "This family is evil." But it got worse. Much worse. Someone, I never found out who, posted screenshots of the affair photos in the church's main group. Not the private group, the public group, the one that everyone can see. Within an hour, it had been shared 300 times. The pastor himself, Reverend James Allen, had to post a message asking people to stop sharing the content and to handle the situation with discretion and prayer. Too late. The names people started calling Derek and Jennifer on that Facebook group were harsh, brutal. The language was ugly. It was cruel. It was completely unhinged. Someone called Jennifer a home-wrecking whore. Someone else called Derek a faithless man who betrayed his vows. Someone wrote, "This woman destroyed a marriage and a family for her own selfish desires." Another person wrote, "The Bible is clear about adultery. Death is the only appropriate punishment. Thank God Derek got what he deserved." I read those comments and felt sick, because even though I was angry at Derek, even though I believed he deserved consequences, I didn't believe he deserved death. I didn't believe Jennifer deserved to be killed. I didn't believe any of this was I wanted to expose the truth. I wanted to show people that Michael had lied about. I hadn't wanted to create a hate mob. But what surprised me was the reaction to Richard and Margaret. The church wasn't angry at them for the infidelity. That was Derek's sin. The church was angry at them for lying, for manipulating the narrative, for using the church community to hide the truth and shame me in the process. And people started digging. Someone looked up the custody case. All of that is public record. Found court documents showing that Richard and Margaret had tried to take custody of my daughters. Found my statement in those documents explaining what happened. Found the harassment. Found the pattern of behavior. By Sunday evening, Richard and Margaret's name had been flagged in the neighborhood Facebook page as a location of fraudulent church activity. They'd received 17 emails from church members asking them to meet with the pastors. By Tuesday, they were asked to leave the church pending an investigation. I didn't expect that. I thought the truth would come out. I thought people would know what happened. I didn't expect the church to turn on them this quickly. I didn't expect them to be excommunicated this completely. The next 2 weeks were surreal. I became a complicated figure in that church community. Some people saw me as the victim, the woman who'd been falsely accused, whose daughters had been harassed, who'd been driven from her faith community because of lies. Those people started reaching out, started calling me, started apologizing for believing Margaret's narrative. But other people were angry at me, not for exposing the affair, that was Derek's sin, but for exposing it in such a public, theatrical way. for choosing to distribute those binders instead of, say, just posting the truth directly on Facebook, for being calculating about it, for deliberately orchestrating a moment of maximum impact. One woman, I think her name was Patricia Chen, though I'm not sure, wrote me a letter that I still have. She said, "Rachel, I believe you about what happened, but I'm troubled by how you chose to expose it. You could have simply sent this information to the pastor. You could have handled this privately. Instead, you made a spectacle, and I'm not sure that's who you are." I read that letter a dozen times. I probably read it 50 times, because Patricia might have been right. Patricia might have seen something that I was trying not to see about myself. The pastor, Reverend James Allen, he was in his mid-60s, thoughtful, genuinely kind, actually asked to meet with me. We met at a coffee shop called The Daily Grind in downtown Asheville. It's a quiet place with good coffee and private booths. He was kind but direct. He said, "Rachel, the church failed your daughters. We failed you, and I'm sorry. But I want to understand your decision-making process. Help me understand why you chose public exposure. Why not come to me? Why not handle this through proper church channels?" I sat with that question for a long time before answering, and honestly, my answer wasn't noble. It wasn't something I'm proud of. I said, because I was angry. Because I wanted them to feel what my daughters felt when those women cornered Sophie in the farmer's market. Because I wanted the church to understand what lying looks like. Because I was tired of being the victim of their narrative. And because I wanted them to experience shame the way my daughter experienced shame. He nodded. He didn't condemn me, but he didn't absolve me either. He just said, "Thank you for your honesty, Rachel. I think that's something to sit with." What happened to Richard and Margaret after that was systematic. The church didn't excommunicate them. That's not how this denomination works. But they were essentially shunned. People stopped inviting them to events. The lady who organized the church's monthly potlucks suddenly couldn't accommodate them anymore. Volunteers started pulling back from the charities Margaret oversaw. One woman actually resigned from a board position rather than continue serving with Margaret. The pastor asked Richard to step back from his role as a deacon. By the end of 2 weeks, Richard and Margaret felt completely isolated within the community they'd called home for 20 years. But they didn't accept that isolation gracefully. I found out from Marcus Webb, my friendly contact at the church, that Richard and Margaret had decided to leave. Not just the church, not just Asheville, the entire state. They were moving to Florida. They sold their primary residence in Asheville, that gorgeous Victorian mansion in Grove Park, within 3 weeks. They sold it at a loss, actually, which suggests they were desperate to leave. They sold the vacation property in the mountains. They kept the Charlotte condo, but they were gone from North Carolina. They moved to Tampa, Florida, a retirement community right on the water. He told me they'd bought a condo in a place called Sunset Harbor, which is one of those upscale retirement communities where you pay a huge buy-in fee and then live in a gated area with other wealthy retirees. Before they left, Margaret posted on her personal Facebook profile a long, rambling post about how alienated she felt from her community, about how people have become so judgmental, about how she never thought her church family would abandon her in her time of need. She posted about how she'd served that church for 2 decades and how they'd turned their backs on her. She even said something about wishing Derek was still alive because he would have taken care of me and Richard in our elder years. Which was hilarious, honestly. Derek was broke. Derek had debts. Derek left behind a complicated financial situation that took months to unravel. Margaret and Richard were wealthy beyond measure. The implication that Derek, who'd been unfaithful, who died in an accident partly caused by reckless driving, who'd left 2 orphan children, would have somehow been her financial savior, was delusional. But that's what people do. They rewrite narratives to make themselves the victim. But the real consequence of all of this was for Lucas and Marcus, the 2 orphaned boys. They'd been placed with distant relatives of Derek's, a cousin named Tom, who lives in Charlotte. Tom had been reluctant to take them. He had his own family, his own problems, his own responsibilities. But he felt obligated. He felt like family duty demanded it, so he took them in. Tom wasn't a bad person. He's actually kind. But he's also a man with his own life, his own children, his own financial limitations. He couldn't provide the kind of care and attention that Lucas and Marcus needed. They weren't with Richard and Margaret anymore. They weren't with me. They were in the system, essentially, being raised by people who resented them. They were being raised by people who saw them as a burden more than a blessing. That's where my victory turned hollow, because those two children were still suffering. Their mother was dead, their father was dead, they'd been rejected by their paternal grandparents, and now they were being raised by people who resented them, and I couldn't fix that. My strategic distribution of evidence, my theatrical moment of truth, none of that helped Lucas and Marcus, but it did protect my daughters. And that was the point, wasn't it? That was the whole reason I did this, to protect Miranda and Sophie, to make sure they weren't gaslighted by their church community, to make sure they knew that their grandfather and grandmother were liars, to make sure that they understood that saying no to people who were hurting them was not only acceptable, it was necessary. I got 2 apology letters in the mail, one from a woman named Susan Chen, who'd been one of the 6 women at the farmer's market. She wrote a handwritten note. "Sophie, I owe you a deep apology. I allowed myself to be manipulated by a narrative that I didn't verify. I made assumptions without asking questions. I shamed you for having healthy boundaries, and that was wrong. I'm so sorry. I hope you can forgive me. I'm working on being a better listener and a more thoughtful person." The letter was sincere. I could feel the genuine remorse. Another apology came from the church itself, an official letter from the pastoral council, signed by Reverend James Allen and 3 other pastors. They said, "We failed you and your daughters. We received claims from a member of our congregation, and we did not verify them. We did not reach out to hear your perspective. We failed in our duty to care for the vulnerable members of our community. We are implementing new policies to ensure that all claims about other members are verified before any action is taken. We invite you back to this church. We offer counseling services for your daughters, and we apologize." I read that letter and I cried. Not from joy, from complicated emotions. Relief that I wasn't crazy. Sadness that it had to happen this way. Guilt about how I'd chosen to expose the truth. Gratitude that people were taking responsibility. I didn't go back to the church. Here's where I need to be honest with you about something. I made a choice that was calculated, strategic, designed to achieve maximum impact in a community I knew would respond to moral outrage about infidelity and deception. I weaponized the truth, and yes, the truth was important. Margaret was lying, Derek had been unfaithful, my daughters had been harassed. All of that was real. But my method? That wasn't about justice. That was about revenge, wrapped in the language of truth-telling. I think about the way I spent 8 hours creating those binders, the care I took with the calligraphy, the way I arranged them on that table, the way I calculated that they would be found during the morning service, the way I knew exactly what would happen when people saw those photographs, the way I orchestrated the whole thing like I was directing a film. That wasn't just truth-telling. That was a performance. And I was the director. I started therapy again. I'd stopped going to therapy during the custody battles because I was focused on survival. But after what happened at Riverside Faith, I realized I needed help processing my own rage and my own decisions. I needed someone to help me figure out what I'd actually done and why I'd done it. My therapist was a woman named Dr. Patricia Morris. She was older, maybe in her 60s, with white hair and kind eyes. She had a small office in a converted Victorian house on the north side of Asheville. Soft lighting, comfortable chairs, the kind of space that makes you want to tell the truth. On my 3rd session, she asked me directly, "Rachel, do you believe what you did was necessary?" And I said, "I believe it was necessary to expose the lies. I'm less certain about the method." "Why did you choose that method?" she asked. I thought about it. I thought about standing in that print shop, paying extra for high-quality materials, spending 8 hours creating those binders, arranging them so carefully on that table, calculating exactly when they would be discovered. I thought about the theatrical nature of it all. And I said, because I wanted them to feel seen. I wanted everyone to see Richard and Margaret the way I saw them, as manipulative, as cruel, as willing to hurt children for power. I wanted them to experience public shame the way my daughter experienced public shame at the farmer's market. So it was revenge, Dr. Morris said, not as a judgment, just as a statement. It was justice, I said, with revenge as a component. Rachel, justice and revenge can look the same on the surface, but they're different in intent. Justice is about establishing truth and holding people accountable. Revenge is about making someone else hurt the way you hurt. You did both, and I think you need to decide which one you were actually doing. That conversation haunted me. because I genuinely didn't know. I still don't. Was I protecting my daughters and exposing lies? Yes. Was I also orchestrating a moment of humiliation and public shaming? Also yes. Both things were true. Both intentions existed inside me at the same time. My daughters processed it differently. Miranda struggled with the public nature of it. She worried about how my action reflected on our family. She worried about being that girl whose mother exposed her family drama to a church. She worried about the optics of it all. She'd written a paper for her psychology class about family trauma and narrative control. And she was very aware of how the story could be framed different ways, depending on who was telling it. Sophie was more philosophical. She said to me one day, "Mom, they tried to shame me. You made sure they understood what shame feels like. I don't think that's wrong. I think that's accountability." I didn't try to convince either of them that I was right, because I wasn't sure I was. I was just a mother protecting her children in the way that made sense to me in that moment. A way that involved anger and strategy, and a willingness to hurt people in order to protect my own. 3 months after Richard and Margaret left North Carolina, I received an unexpected letter in the mail. It came in a standard envelope with my address written in careful, uncertain handwriting. No return address. I almost threw it away. It looked like it could be junk mail. But something made me open it. It was from Lucas, one of the orphaned boys. He was 10 years old, and he'd written to me in careful, uncertain handwriting, "Dear Mrs. Morrison, I hope you don't mind that I'm writing to you. My cousin gave me your address. I found your name on the divorce papers in my dad's filing cabinet. My cousin Tom said I could write to you if I wanted to. I wanted to tell you that I'm sorry for what happened to your family. I know my dad wasn't a good husband. I know that he was not honest. My mom, Jennifer, she never talked about your husband bad. She said he was a good father to me and Marcus, even if he wasn't good at being honest to you. She said sometimes people can be good at some things and bad at other things. My grandpa and grandma, they sent me to my cousin's house, and they don't visit anymore. But that's okay. My cousin is nice, and his wife cooks good food. Marcus has friends here. We're okay. I just wanted you to know that you didn't do anything wrong. You protected your family. That's what moms do. Love, Lucas." I sobbed reading that letter. Ugly crying. The kind of crying where you can't breathe properly and your whole body shakes. Because a 10-year-old boy, a child whose entire world had been destroyed by grief and circumstance and adult decisions that he had no control over, was telling me that I'd done the right thing. I read that letter maybe 20 times, and each time, I cried, because Lucas was giving me permission. He was telling me that protecting my daughters, even in the messy way I'd done it, was okay. I wrote him back. I spent a long time on that letter. I told him about the importance of boundaries. I told him that his father had made mistakes, but that didn't make him less of a father. I told him that his mother had loved him. I told him that he deserved to be happy and safe, and that I was rooting for him. I told him that life wasn't always fair, and that sometimes adults make decisions that hurt kids, but that he wasn't responsible for fixing those decisions. I told him that I was proud of him for reaching out and being honest. I sent him a book, too. A novel age-appropriate for kids his age. Something about a boy dealing with loss and finding his way. And I included a note. "Lucas, I'm sending you this book because I think you're brave, and I think you might enjoy this story. I'm here if you ever want to write again. Love, Aunt Rachel." His cousin, Derek's cousin, whose name was Tom, actually reached out to me a few months later. He said Lucas had shared my letter with him. He said Lucas had showed him the book I'd sent. He said, "Rachel, I don't know what happened between you and Richard and Margaret, and honestly I don't want to know. But I appreciate that you're showing kindness to this kid who's been through hell. If there's anything I need to tell you about how he's doing, or anything you want to send, let me know." That became a bridge I hadn't expected. A way to help Lucas and Marcus that didn't require me to engage with the legal system or Richard and Margaret or any of the toxicity. Just a simple, quiet act of kindness toward 2 children who deserved it. I started sending Lucas letters regularly. Not demanding anything, not trying to be his mother or his therapist, just being an adult who cared about him. I sent him birthday cards. I sent him a care package for Christmas. I asked him about school and his interests and what he was reading. And he wrote back. His handwriting improved. His letters became longer, more confident. He started asking me questions about things, about how to handle bullying at school, about what to do when he felt sad about his dad, about how to be a good big brother. And in a weird way, it made the whole thing feel less like revenge and more like something else, something closer to justice, something closer to protecting the vulnerable, something closer to actually making a difference in a child's life. It's been 8 months since I distributed those binders. 8 months since Richard and Margaret left North Carolina. 8 months since the church community turned on them. 8 months since I made a choice that changed everything. Richard and Margaret are living in Tampa now. They have a retirement community condo overlooking the water. They have money and time and all the things that wealthy people have when they're past their productive years. Richard's restaurants are doing well. He hired a general manager to run the day-to-day operations, and he's living off the proceeds. Margaret plays tennis at the country club and volunteers at a hospital gift shop. They have a life, but they don't have community. They don't have the Riverside Faith Community Church. They don't have the social status they had in Asheville. They don't have the respect of the people who knew them. They have money and comfort and isolation. I don't know if I forgive them. I probably don't. Forgiveness feels premature. But I'm not angry anymore. Angry is exhausting. Angry is a weight I don't want to carry. My daughters are doing better. Miranda finished her first year of college at UNC and declared a major in counseling psychology. She wants to help people navigate family trauma, which is beautiful and tragic, and exactly what she needed to do. She's finding her voice. She's understanding that her family's dysfunction doesn't have to be her destiny. She's learning to set boundaries. She's healing. Sophie is a junior in high school now. She's on the volleyball team. She's in a healthy friend group. She hasn't forgotten what happened, but she's not defined by it anymore. She's learning to trust her own instincts about people. She's learning that saying no to people who are hurting you is not selfish, it's survival. I'm dating someone. His name is Michael. He's a divorce attorney, which is funny and ironic and probably speaks to some pattern I should explore in therapy, but he's a good person. We met at a community event. He knows about everything that happened. He knows about the church, the infidelity, the exposure, the fallout. He doesn't judge me for my choices. He just says, "You protected your kids. Everything else is just logistics." I've stayed in touch with Marcus Webb from the church. He's actually become a genuine friend. We get coffee sometimes and talk about everything about it and what it means to be part of a community that stands for it. He's working to change the culture of society, to make it less judgmental, more open, more willing to ask questions before condemning. He's trying to make sure what happened to me and my daughters doesn't happen to someone else. Lucas still sends me letters. He's 11 now. He's thriving in school. He got a B+ on a math test, and he was so proud he included a photo of the test with his letter. He wants to be an engineer. He's learning to process his grief in a healthy way with the counselor his cousin Tom hired. He's learning that there are adults in the world who will see him, acknowledge him, and help him without any expectation of anything in return. I've also thought a lot about what I could have done differently. I could have simply sent the evidence to the pastor. I could have met with Reverend James and presented the facts privately. I could have allowed the system to work without my theatrical intervention. I could have been the bigger person. I could have taken the high road. I think that probably would have been the more mature choice. I think Dr. Morris would have approved of that choice. I think my daughters would be proud of me for that choice. But if I'm being honest, I don't regret what I did, because sometimes the system doesn't work. Sometimes people who have power and resources use that to protect themselves. Sometimes people who have been wronged have to make noise to be heard. Sometimes you have to burn something down in order to build something better. What I've learned is that there's a difference between truth-telling and revenge, but they can look very similar when you're in the moment. I was doing both. I was protecting my daughters and making sure my ex-in-laws experienced consequences. And I'm not entirely comfortable with that, but I'm also not ashamed of it. The truth is more complicated than right or wrong. The truth is that I was a mother who was desperate to protect her children. The truth is that I made a choice that was calculated and strategic. The truth is that my ex-in-laws lied and manipulated and hurt vulnerable people. The truth is that they experienced consequences for those actions. The truth is that my daughters are safer because of what I did. And the truth is that I'm still processing the complexity of how I chose to do it. If you've ever been in a situation where you had to choose between taking the high road and protecting yourself, comment below. Tell me what you chose, because that's the real conversation here. We talk a lot about forgiveness and grace and turning the other cheek, but we don't talk enough about the fact that sometimes protecting yourself and your children requires getting your hands a little dirty. Sometimes it requires choosing yourself. Sometimes it requires choosing your kids. Sometimes it requires accepting that you're not going to be the hero of everyone's story. My daughters are safe. My family is intact. And Richard and Margaret are living a life of quiet, comfortable exile in Florida. They have money, they have time, they have comfort, but they don't have community. They don't have respect. They don't have the life they had before. That's not the happy ending where everyone learns and grows. That's the real-world ending where people make choices and live with consequences. And sometimes, that's the only justice you get.